Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, let's talk about a controversial figure, the bestie friends of No Proof Allowed, Jeffrey Mishlove, otherwise known as Jason Reza Jorjani. Well, I'm not sure what that's all about with him and his interesting connection to this odd fellow. And apparently people like to hear his pseudo-intellectual babble, but he's one of those typical academia people that live in a false world when he apparently has went straight from his college education, PhD, etc., and must have come from a family that could support that, into the typical college professor sheltered world reality where you can do what you want to a degree. So, here's a guy who came from his father, from an Iranian father. This is when all of them fled the country after the fall of the Shah. Most of them were quite wealthy that came here. They bought most of Beverly Hills and were everywhere around at that particular time. And I think he must have been part of that. His father was. He claims that his mother is of Northern European ancestry, whatever that means. Of course, why is not stated, I don't know. But if she's German, she's Persian. Germans are Persians. They are not white as what people think they are. They are Aryans. Aryans are people that come from Persia. People don't get it. And of course, Jorjani didn't have the courage to speak about that. And still doesn't. He won't attack the Muslims and their horrible activities since their inception of how they conquered most of the Middle East. The Persians had a horrible empire that invaded everybody. You got to remember the Persians invented impaling and a little thing called crucifixion. So, certainly, and we have a movie called, remember these 300 with the Spartans? Who were they fighting? The Persians, who were trying to take over Greece. So, this is again an imperial country, invading everywhere, conquering people and ruling them. But of course, that's the way it was done back then. There really wasn't any countries. And of course, the minute you had enough people and enough food to put in their bellies, well, you put arms in their hands and took over somewhere else. That's the history in general. But he doesn't seem to understand all this. He wants to write his pseudo-intellectual garbage, talking about his philosophical understandings of the world. Well, that's his business, I guess. You certainly can do that. I'm for anybody to express anything. As a matter of fact, I really hate censorship where people say, well, you can't say this, you can't say that. And that means that, where does that can't begin and end? Well, at any time something doesn't agree with you or isn't politically correct, then all of a sudden nobody can say it. Well, that certainly is not good for society and is not good for anybody. You have to be able to go out there and make radical statements and start to change things. Well, what I see from Jason here, which is interesting that Jason would have a Jewish name. So, if you look at his belief system, it's very naive. It's very typical of a person stuck between two, quote, racial backgrounds, but of course we're not entirely sure. So he doesn't really look like an Arab. He doesn't look like a particular white person. He kind of has a silly face with, I don't know if he's had a problem with his right eye or so, but it looks like a clown eye. I'm not sure what's going on there, but making fun of how somebody looks is not, I'm not making fun, I'm making an observation. Kind of odd. So, but he doesn't really understand what he is, where he's from, and the culture he's talking about. Now, he rejects the Turkish culture that is running the entire Middle East. That's who the tribes are that took over everything, and they're radical Islam. He's not against that. I don't know if he's Islamic or not. I don't think he is, but I don't know what he claims as a religion, if any. Probably none. But he's stuck. He hasn't really read. He wants to feel that he's special and that the Persian culture was a great empire and everything that goes with it. Well, of course, that's completely subjective to the individuals who want to look into that and think. Now, this is a guy who's now 40 years old. He's done quite well. I'm assuming Daddy had a lot of money because he went he was born in Manhattan, which generally is a wealthy area. Apparently, he went to Long Island schools together. All these things are not cheap. He has dual citizenship of the United States and Iran, which is interesting. Why would his parents do that? I mean, he was born here. Very strange. So basically, he's got a lot of money. He went in and received a PhD in philosophy from Stony Brook University on Long Island. All of this is, I'm sure he was a smart kid. I don't know if he got stuff, I should say smart in the way of answering questions and regurgitating them on tests. You know, the things that people really like Jeffrey Mishlove and his PhD panels he has on there all the time. God forbid a normal person should have an opinion. So the whole idea is that apparently had money to do this. So, which is very, very interesting. So I'm assuming Daddy was one of those rich Iranians. I don't know what Mommy did or whatever the story was, but most likely it appears his father came over here and didn't bring what they usually do, a large family and a wife with him. He met some American of some background, but he won't state that. And again, I don't like these missing things, but maybe you would if you met him. This is just general information you can find on him on the web. So he's very much into his cultural background. Of course, most people do this when they feel alienated. What do? Regular society rejects you, and you say to yourself, well, I have to go back to who I am. So if I'm black, I go back to Africa. If I'm Celtic, I go back to the Druids. Greek to Greece. So everybody does this, and they try and connect with the cultural background, particularly, as I said, since he isn't racially typical. And it's very typical of the races he got involved with to ignore the fact that he's an Arab. So, like the Swedish people that he got involved with don't understand who he is. Well, that's typical because they have to grab anybody they can because nobody follows these causes that have any kind of mentality because they are persecuted. And that's just the facts of it all. So here he is. He's got money. He's got his own ideals and so forth. Now, I haven't heard any complaints of anybody from his school that states that he is making improper statements in his classroom. I had this problem in high school where teachers babbled on against Vietnam with the bodies of our soldiers still rotting over there. And he wasn't fired from the school. As a matter of fact, I got in trouble because I confronted him on his issues. And nothing came from it, of course. And, of course, when you have a weak-kneed, coward father who does nothing, well, that's what happens. So he just slumped over like the coward he's always been. So it all fits into what's happening. So as long as he wasn't spouting his stuff at in his classrooms, and he worked as a professor for many years at New Jersey Institute of Technology. So, which is very interesting. He taught courses in science, technology, and society. And apparently the philosophy of Martin Heidegger and the history of Iran, of course. Like he's an Iranian. So, it's the same thing, The Americans are so stupid they identify with where they came from. That's why they hyphenate things. I'm an Iranian American. I'm an Irish American. I'm a black. Shouldn't it be that I'm an American black? I'm an American Irish? No. But they don't look at it that way. So he's another one of those. It's this society that allows him to flap his mouth. If he was in Iran, they'd hang him from the latest from the lowest tree after they tortured him for years and murdered his family. That's what the Iranian Germans do. So the whole idea is that you need to understand that, and you need to understand that this is where Aryans come from, and that's of course what Germans are. They never stated they were white. They are Aryans. Aryans are Iranians. They're Persians. So that everybody should get quite familiar with that. So the whole idea is that, so he's hooked up with these called the ultra-right, which is, I just read an article about a woman who was going around talking about the ultra-right. And of course, the ultra-right, as they typically are from my contact with them, support nobody. They're poor slobs. They won't give you a nickel. They like to go out there because they're jealous. They lost their jobs to hardworking people, which they tend not to be. And they hate everybody, even though a lot of them are these, what you would call people like him, Arabs. So the whole idea is that this is what you run into typically. So she talked about how never to get into the ultra-right whatsoever because they'll never support him. Even her boyfriend, which I'm sure was sent to her to infiltrate, to destroy her, wouldn't support her or anything else. So this is very typical. And certainly they're not supporting him. Apparently he got involved with these groups, and then once he was involved with them, and of course I guess he was smart enough to figure out what kind of boobs they were. And finally dropped away from them in disgust of the kind of petty mentality. I'm sure they talked about how terrible the Arabs and everybody else were, and they said, well, I'm an Arab. How can that be? So, so he fell away from all these people because their dogma is really pretty imbecilic. I mean, they're not well-read, intelligent people. They're pamphlet readers. And I've talked to a lot of these people and investigated a lot of these different groups, and they all are the same thing. They're all very ignorant people that just don't get it. Or they're just plain freaks. So he also states that he's not a racist, he's not a white nationalist or anything else. How can he be white nationalist? He's not white. So the whole idea is that, and this is the other thing here, how can you carry a swastika that's a sign from India? And of course we've seen that. And of course the Germans tried to say the Indians and the Tibetans, of course, were somehow Aryans. Well, probably, because if you look at the average German, they look like an Indian. They just don't have the same actual darker color. They have the same brown hair, brown eyes, relatively large nose, and relatively large ears. That's a German. This Nordic look, it has nothing to do with what are called Aryans. Aryans are a different tribe that settled in that particular part of Europe and brought their horrendous culture with them. Nordics are completely different. So, now everybody mixed together, that's why you get the Nordic looks into some of these Deutschies. But the bottom line is that that's just not the real facts of it. And this is just history, people. Just find for yourself. I don't state anything that can't be verified by a third party. Jorjani identifies himself as a Zionist, stating that he has always believed that there's absolutely no conflict between legitimate national interest of Iran and Israel. And he thinks that there's a good interest for both of them in it, which is true because he wants to fight the Turks who run all of the Middle East and all of Europe. And he understands that these are the negative forces that are going against an establishment of a true Iranian higher culture, if there is such a thing. So the whole idea is that, so he owes that, and of course that means that the conflict between him and Jeffrey Mishlove, a Jew, is not there. So he doesn't have to worry about it. But, it's very typical of, but what he doesn't understand is this is the typical kind of guy that was caught up in the National Socialist movement because of bad economies, problems that happened, who identified themselves with the National Social Arabic movement, known as the Nazis, that get caught up in it. And they end up in the front line, they end up at the concentration camps, raping and murdering, thinking this is what we all do, and they don't even have any choice. So there are some that rebelled against this, and they were usually murdered or had to commit suicide because of it. So this is a fact, including Adolf Hitler was a known coward and claimed not to see things after World War I after a big battle because he didn't want to go back into the front lines. Fact, people, look it up. So the whole idea is that this kind of confused reality that he has, trying to grab onto some sort of culture because he feels alienated in America. Well, he's not an American. They don't think they are. And, of course, all Americans don't think that. And I just went over that. So the whole idea is that he sees himself as an Iranian because Daddy was an Iranian. Now, this is very common. I think all of us do that to some degree. I had a friend whose father was Indian. He kind of thought himself as an Indian. He didn't think of himself as an American. So, even though he's married, his mother was American, English, or whatever. So these are all the things that people get confused with. So he's written all these pseudo-intellectual books on different subject matters and likes to put his intellectualism, pseudo-intellectualism into different subjects, even talking about time travel, which he has little knowledge of, just to create a show for his buddy, No Proof Allowed, Jeffrey Mishlove. So here's where this guy is coming from. Now, what did he get in trouble for? He got in trouble for because he was set up. And it was not in his classroom again. I think, to be fair here, plain and simple, is the fact that he wasn't spouting from what I understand in his classroom. There's no reason why he should be harassed by the university he was employed by. If he is spouting his stuff, if he's talking about quantum physics and say, by the way, the Persians figured this out and we should be, well, then we have a problem there. It's what happened to me in high school by this numbnuts. So the whole idea is that that is a problem. Now, I haven't heard any of that, and from what I understand, he didn't do that, but I don't know. If he did do that, then there's a legitimate cause to call him in on the carpet, so to speak, and tell him, stop doing that. Got politics? Talk about it at the local tavern. Now, he was at the local tavern when somebody set him up. Now, it's interesting of who set him up. Well, we all know who's connected behind those kind of things. But the point is that they set him up and he made, I'm not sure if they're even terrible statements. He was stating that, if things keep going the way they are and there is this mass immigration into Europe and other places, that we're going to see people going back to Hitler, which, by the way, is already happening. But, again, the people that are Nazis don't understand that they are Arabs. So they're still claiming the Arab guy and Hitler, the Arab Slavic, who wasn't even German. He was Austrian, but I guess it's all the same, right, Arnold? So the whole idea is, I love the Hitler. So the whole idea is that this is very typical of all of the nonsense that is incorporated in this stuff. So we have to be very aware of what's going on. But there's going to be a time, and of course what's really happening is what happened to, of course, the United States as well, which is now Mexico-America. I mean, and this is just a fact. The majority of the population in the United States is now Latin, most of it coming from Mexico, with 75% of the children in the schools now are Mexican. They're going to have babies and so forth. So in another 50 to 100 years, it's easily going to be the majority. It's just a fact. You want to make that negative or positive just the way it is. Now, the same thing is happening right now in the world in general. Now, how do you take over? Thomas Jefferson said there's 2 ways to conquer a country. And I disagree. I think there's 3 ways to conquer a country. But he didn't consider it an option back in his day because they wouldn't allow it. That is 1, by the military. So you can conquer a country first with guns. You can also conquer a country, which is what's happening and has been happening in Europe for some time now. Debt. What Hitler couldn't do with tanks, he did with banks. The German banks run everything, and you owe them debt. You do what they tell you to do, period. So they move their businesses in. They take all the business from your country to make their country more wealthy. And if the population of your country doesn't like that, you change it. You do that by bringing in pretty much very uneducated, alienated people, and they breed, and you pay for it. What does this do? Well, you fill up the apartments, they have to buy cars, they have to use doctors, they have to buy food. Well, the industries in your country, including real estate, goes sky high, as it has in Europe, which never had a real estate inflation, particularly Germany, until recently. There are now millions upon millions of people that come in. So you take the country as the 3rd way through population. And that's exactly what's happened. So for better or worse, and we'll have to see, certainly the people within the United States haven't done a very good job, period. Will the Mexicans do any better? I don't know. And I don't really care. So I don't have any use for anybody. So let's get this clear. While I am kind of an American, I don't consider myself an American. I consider myself a citizen of the planet, and I have no connections to anybody's country. And Americans certainly don't back other Americans anywhere. They'll spit on you and go with the local crowd. So if you're in Germany or France and either of those don't like you, you'll defend the people in that country, not your fellow American who's being spat upon. Typical Americans. So the whole idea is that, getting back to our buddy here, Jorjani, he is a fantasist. He wants the great empires to come back. It's like a Brit talking about he wants to bring King Arthur back, and all that would win. It was the big fantasy of King Arthur, written by basically a Frenchman and made a lot of bad movies. At the very least, if King Arthur was really around, he was a warlord. And that was it. Whether he was a good or bad, who knows? The French made up all these things, the Round Table and everything else, if there was a King Arthur, just like if there was anybody. So, he's a fantasist. He wants to bring back the great Persian Empire, and like everybody wants to do, yeah, well, they invented this, and they did this, and they had this. Yes, all cultures do that. Nazi Germany had fantastic animal protection laws, which they wrote on the back from the skin. They peeled off the Jews. They had a skin table made of Jews, and that's where they wrote their great protection of animal laws. So, next to the shrunken head of the Jew and the torn up babies that their German shepherds ripped out of the arms of the poor people that went there. But let's write the protection. This is good, yeah. Bring us some crap beer. So the whole idea is that all of that to go with it needs to be fully understood. So, but he's very naive. He's a fantasist. The fact that he thinks that anything's going to happen in Europe, such as that, is absurd. The Muslims will move into, as the Latins have done in the United States, and they will take over everything. You know, they're not killing any Latins. The police, ironically, in the United States are quick to kill blacks and whites, by the way. They just do it a little dirtier. They kill you in prison, which is a known case, by the way. This happens all the time. They're shooting blacks. They're not shooting Mexicans, who have more gangs in the United States than any other group whatsoever, and huge ones, which have hundreds of thousands of members. Now, the blacks can't really meet that. A lot of blacks who are now semi-middle class or just too poor. And then, of course, there's the survival blacks who are in the Crips and the Bloods. And, of course, they have to fight each other instead of fighting the other ones. So, here we go again. But that's created deliberately. So he's a fantasist. He's living in the King Arthur days of the great Persian Empire. Why, I don't know, because he claims only to be half Persian on top of it. So the whole idea is that, what does that all mean? So he's decided, because he's kind of an odd intellectual freak, and he's not going to find too many Arabs that have the same intellectual, or Persians that have the same attitudes as him. So he probably feels very alienated. So this is what he's done to do it, and he's aligned himself with a bunch of the usual right-wing racist nutjobs that are out there, some Swedish guy in these presses, and, you know, the great glory days of, and, you know, it all links to the Persian Empire. There's, you know, the Nazis looked into the fact of where they had any heritage. They don't have any heritage. It all goes back to the Arabs. But do you hear them screaming that they're Arabs and how great Persia was? No, it's the Tibetans. We're northern India. That's ridiculous. The bottom line is that they're Persians, and that's where they come from. That's where the Aryan race comes from, some little ditch hole in Persia somewhere. So this is what's happened, and the migrations are all up for great discussion. But, you know, if you want to believe this kind of twisted fantasy, and all people do this, they want to talk about the great cultures. I've seen this happen through every single one. You know, the Ruskies, we're the greatest, we're so smart. Oh, come on. What has Russia ever done? Come on, there's virtually nothing coming from them. They're known for shoddy workmanship, fascists, and murder. I mean, they basically are, were just a competing gang with the Nazis, and they won. There was really nothing different between Nazism and the Russian Empire, regardless if they want to call themselves communist or whatever. They're basically two gangs. They got together, and of course, the German gang made all sorts of treaties with them and called them brothers and buddies, and of course, they turned on them as well. So this, of course, is the joke of it all. But they were just the same belief systems, a little bit different, but basically they were just two competing gangs. So everybody says this. You go to everybody, the Greeks are the greatest, we had all the great thinkers. Yeah, but where are you today? And so everybody has the same thing, that their culture is so great with absolutely nothing to back it up. So there's all sorts of problems there, and he won't deal with the fact. He knows how dangerous the Turkish Empire is, and now he wants to make friends with them. It was the last comment I heard with them, because he thinks it's the only way that Persia or Iran can survive. Well, the point is, you've got militant, psychotic leaders there following, which are backed up in Iran by religious dogma, so there's no way that's ever going to change.